Welcome to this episode of Ask the Professor. I'm your host, Ron Tulley, Dean for the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, and Professor of English here at the University of Findlay. The purpose of Ask the Professor is to get to know our professors a bit better, learn more about their vocational passions, what they love to teach, their ongoing research, service, scholarship, and creative projects. And hopefully when we have finished, we'll have a better understanding of their discipline, their typical workday, and of course, who they are and what motivates them. For today's episode, we feature Dr. Allison Kiefner-Burmeister. I know her simply as Allie, but the students know her affectionately as Dr. KB. Dr. Kiefner-Burmeister received her Bachelor of Science degree from Eastern Kentucky University and her Master's and PhD in Experimental Psychology from Bowling Green State University. She is currently an Associate Professor of Psychology here at the University of Findlay and has been on the faculty since 2014. Dr. Kiefner-Burmeister's specialization is in developmental psychology, and her research focuses on the development of health behaviors in childhood. Her key research areas include childhood body image, eating habits, and media influences. She's a member of the Society for Research on Child Development and the Society of Behavioral Medicine. When she's not engaged in academic work, Allie enjoys hobby farming, reading, working with animals, and moving toward environmental sustainability. So welcome, Allie.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So you started your college career off at EKU. Was your degree in psychology there?
It was, yes, a Bachelor of Science in Psych.
So let's talk about that a little bit because you work with undergrads here at UF. Why did you choose this field?
I chose specifically psychology while I was actually enrolled at EKU. I always had a psych major, but I had a criminal justice minor and a Spanish minor, and I was actually wanting to be a police detective. That was my first foray into the occupational world. I really wanted to be a police detective. And after a while, after taking lots of different classes and starting to understand people a little bit more, I started to become fascinated in the world of research, which if you think about it, some police detective work is trying to figure something out, right? So I do much the same thing in that way. I consistently try to figure out why people are doing what they do. And then I just became enamored in my psych classes. And I've always loved children, and trying to figure out why children think in the way that they do and how that is rooted in biology is really how I came to this field. So I maintained my major and minor, but completely switched fields. And I'm very happy that I did. It worked out perfectly for me.
Okay. So maybe for our students in the audience here, you could define the field of developmental psychology. What does that mean?
Right, certainly. So in psychology, you largely have two different groups. You have the clinical psychology realm and the experimental psychology realm. So the clinicians are the ones that would be therapists and working with individuals with disorders. The other group, the experimental psychologists, are consistently researching and working in the lab to try to understand human behavior. So in some areas of experimental psychology, they're working with neurology, trying to figure out what brain areas are impacting behavior, sort of what your cognitions are based on what your neurology is doing. And then in developmental psychology, we work a lot with the change over time. So how the growth, the biological, physiological growth of humans is impacting their behaviors. So when a child's brain grows and develops, how is that child then seeing different behaviors based on the brain development? We also work a lot with genetics, genetic predisposition, and the impact of the environment.
So you're obviously a professor, and you just mentioned there's obviously a lot of opportunity for research in the field. Aside from those two areas, are there other types of jobs students might pursue should they go this route?
The route of psychology or the route of developmental psychology?
Let's stick with development, and then maybe we can expand into the general route of psychology after.
Certainly. So most developmental psychologists, again, as experimental psychologists, most are going to work in academia. And they are going to work as researchers, and researching professors would be the most common end goal for developmental psychologists. But we also do have different, very unique applied fields. For example, as a child development professor and researcher, I also work a little bit with the media and how the media impacts children. So one of the fascinating things that I could do in an applied way is work with organizations like Sesame Street. So every time that you see a child-specific program, either a book or a series or even a movie, when they are attempting to tap into or help children in a certain way, like let's say that they're trying to get them to learn to eat better. As you notice, Cookie Monster switched over to vegetables, you know? So
Cookies are a sometimes food.
right, cookies are sometimes food. So Sesame Street, along with all of these major children's programming, will have developmental psychologists who work on their staff as applied consultants. So they will send them a script and say, is this getting at what we want to actually get at with children? Is this actually helpful? And then they will edit or approve that script. So that's one very fascinating applied way that developmental psychologists work.
Very cool. So I think we'll come back to the larger question of psychology a bit later, but I know you, just from personal experience, you really love working with your students on research projects. So tell us a little bit about the process, about how you recruit students and what kind of projects students are working on now, and maybe some of the past projects they've worked on.
Right, so all of the psychology professors, we all have research labs. So we're doing our own research within a lab, and we have student research assistants that are helping us. So we all run our labs a little bit differently, but the same thing that they all have is that we are teaching students how to do research with real participants, and hopefully they are doing real research that they can then publish in different ways, either as a presentation, they can do that on campus, or they can do that at conferences, or they are working hopefully sometimes for an overall peer-reviewed journal article. As you know, that can be a very difficult process, right? And it can take a long time. So depending on the student's goals, sometimes their goal will be, I want to get better at public speaking, and I want to have some publications on my record. So they're more to the presentation end than the 4 years down the line publication of a journal article end. So all of our students in psych have this opportunity to grow toward and become good enough in their psych field and knowledge to become a lab member in these different labs. So then they take it as a course. They take a certain number of credit hours, either 1 to 3, and then they work in that professor's lab for anywhere from 3 to 9 hours a week. So for me, what that means is that the students who are working in my lab, I generally choose them based on their performance in classes. So I watch them in my classes. And as you know, here at UF, we know our students, right? We know them for years.
Definitely.
So I'm able to sort of track these different students. And when one begins to show a lot of promise or a lot of interest, then often I will go up to them and say, here's what I'm doing. Here's the research that I'm working on. I would love for you to be able to come and work on this research with me. Other times I will hold different interview processes, and I'll allow students to apply to be in the lab, and then we'll interview them, and then I'll figure out from that interview who is a good fit. So once they're in the lab, what they're doing is we meet once or twice a week, and we keep them updated, everybody on what projects everyone's working with, and then they will either go collect data in the field. For me, collecting data in the field means going to preschools often, or going to schools, or going to daycares. Now, of course, this year has changed the dynamic of that a little bit, right? So we're hoping for a time in which we can return to schools. But that will be out in the field where they're working with participants. They gather data, they come back, they analyze the data, and they write up those abstracts for presentations, or they write up those journal articles with me. Then, when we're always working on different legs of different studies, at the same time that they're collecting data for one study, we are creating a different study. So what does separate my lab a little bit from some others on campus is that when my students join my lab, they are working on my projects. So I have overall projects that I'm working on, overall experiments that I'm working on. They provide great input to and help me with the creation of these, but they are all large projects that are going to be published in academic journals. Now, some labs on campus, they have a more free focus where students can do their own individual work. And that is wonderful as an independent study. And I do work with students on their independent studies like that. But in my lab, the difference is largely that they are working on bigger projects. But the benefit of that is that they then get their names on academic publications. And they are able to go to international conferences with me for these larger projects, as opposed to smaller ones that are maybe more engaging individually to the student because they are the sole researcher on that project. But my students really enjoy the opportunity to be on peer-reviewed journal articles and to go to national and international conferences with these large projects that we work on.
Fantastic. So this next one's personal. It's personal for me too, and I've always kind of wondered, your perspective on it. You're one of a few professors on campus who has a spouse or partner who's also a professor at UF, and students sometimes talk about these things. Just for audience clarification, Allie's husband is Dr. Burmeister, who is also in the psychology department at UF. So what's it like from your perspective to work with your spouse in the same department? How does it affect your work, your research, your relationships?
That's a great question. I get asked that all the time. And I think that, first of all, for any double academic couple, the gold standard is a double academic appointment, right? It's almost undoable. In fact, people would say, you shouldn't really have that as a goal because it so rarely comes to fruition. But for us, it is entirely normal because we met in graduate school when we were in the same labs working on the same projects. So from the time that we've known each other, we have always been working as colleagues. And we do very much toe the colleague line, in that when we are at work, we are colleagues and we work well together. We work well together in meetings. We do research projects together. We have similar areas of research interest, and we co-author on things consistently. So it actually buoys both of us. It allows us to do more research than we would if we actually didn't have that person there with us that we could communicate with on our research. But it is, I think, a different dynamic, but it's the only one that we've ever known. So it works out really well.
Let's talk about the department just a bit more. We know UF is a small to mid-sized school. It's certainly not what we would know as academics as an R1, which is a heavy research school, much more budget for research projects, etc. Say put yourself in our students' place. You're going to come to Findlay and you're going to major in psychology. How do we sell that? What's our 30-minute speech? What's our elevator speech? Why come to Findlay? Why be a psychology major?
My elevator speech has actually gotten a lot of students, thankfully, to come to Findlay to be in the psych program, because what we offer is the opportunity to get to know and work with faculty in a very close way. So if you go to another larger school, for example, you are going to be competing much more for those research assistant appointments, for example, for the publications, for the presentations, for any type of the resources that school offers. And you are going to have to really be fighting to get noticed. And you can have some really great students who would have been able to be on their way to a PhD, but because they went to a larger school, they got lost in the shuffle. They either didn't have luck on their side, or they weren't forceful enough to make their professors get to know them by going to office hours and emailing them all the time. Whereas at UF, we make that very easy. We get to know all of our students in their freshman year. We work with them consistently. We notice them. We know everybody's name. So then when I see somebody who wants to be a scientist or wants to get a PhD or wants to get their master's degree, they go on my mental list. And they also go on the mental list of all the 4 other faculty members. And we make sure that we support them. We either tell them what we're doing with labs, we give them the opportunity to join our lab, or the opportunity to do an independent study. So the student is working with the faculty member from day one to get them where they need to be for their either academic position or their applied position, their occupation. So from the very beginning, it's a cooperative effort to get that student where they need to be, as opposed to a larger school where that student would have to do it alone and they would have to fight.
All right, I'm sold. I'm coming. So let's switch gears a little bit. Tell us a little bit about your interest in sustainability. Does that inform your job in terms of your research and your interaction with students? And if so, how?
That's a really great question. I don't think that I have ever made an effort to think about how those relate, but they absolutely do. One of my passions, as you said, is hobby farming. And you've seen our land that we
Yes.
attempt to have a large garden and to grow a lot of our own food. And in good months, about 5 months out of the year, we grow about 50 to 70% of our own food. And that works toward environmental sustainability, obviously, because we don't have packaging and plastic and transportation of those foods and all. But this does relate directly into my research, in that one of the things that I study is how children are exposed to food early on and how they learn to eat healthy and be healthy. And one of the best things that we know people can do with their children is do things like go to farms and allow children to understand how food grows, so that they know what a tomato is and how it actually grows out of the ground, so they get a better appreciation for it. And then when they're eating tomato sauce, they can understand where that tomato came from. So going to different things like not only hobby farms and farms, but also farmers markets, and allowing the children to see how fruits and vegetables grow, to see them in their appropriate form, and to understand this is what's healthy for humans to eat, not necessarily highly processed fruit snacks, which also are not very sustainable for the environment. So those do connect in an interesting way that I never really thought about before.
Yeah, this is just a side note. I was thinking about that rhetorically from the perspective of packaging. You mentioned that, which is one component of the sustainability. Transportation is obviously, with the carbon footprint, a huge one. But we talk about this in some of my rhetoric classes, where there's a perception that glass, because it's natural, is better. But it actually, in terms of a packaging thing, is much more expensive. It's much more expensive to transport. It doesn't, for example, with beer, which can be damaged by sunlight, it does not protect the beer as well as, say, aluminum does. So a lot of things that people don't think about, because I think with certain things, there's just this perception that it's natural or better, which I think, no pun intended, feeds into some of your research in terms of perceptions people have of how our food is made, how it's distributed, where it comes from, all of that.
Yeah, you actually, there's a term that we use that you almost said. I thought you were going to say it. You were so close, but you're just coming up with it in your head. It's our term is "what is natural is good" fallacy. And we
I
use
love
this
it.
consistently. What is natural is good. And one of the papers that I wrote last year is a review, and it does tie into some of the what is natural is good, is in the way that if you put food that is equally as unhealthy as other food into a paper bag and have only brown and green on the label, and you put a leaf on it, people think that that is the more healthy option than the one that has bright colors and white packaging, just because, well, it has a leaf on it, so therefore it's going to be better for you.
We're visual creatures. It's very powerful, that effect it has. That's why branding is such a big deal, and it's why we respond to nonverbals the way we do. Let's go in a little bit of a different direction. You teach the intro course, right? Psych 100. Am I right in that?
Yes.
Okay. So that's obviously kind of a gateway for many students to get interested in the field. Maybe some of our folks are interested in, they got to check off a GE box or a core box,
Okay.
and that strikes their interest. How do you make that transition for students that you just see their interest is kind of peaked, like they might be a good psychology major? How do you get that spark, or is that just something that comes about and naturally in the way you teach?
I would say that a lot of our students come in the psych program, either with the psychology track or the occupational therapy track through psychology. So a lot of them that we're going to gain that way. And then the majority of the rest of our psych people, either psych undergrads or graduates, one of the things that they are going into is physical therapy. So a lot of them, it's not only gen psych that we are going to have them and get them interested in psych or psych minor, but it's the gen psych and then lifespan and then abnormal. And by the time they're on that third one, they're hooked. And often they're going to become a psych minor or even a psych major toward their track. But when it comes to the ones that are actually in gen psych, one of the fascinating things that I love to see in these students is you can just see it in their eyes when they're just so interested and engaged in something. There's like, you've seen this in your students, right? It's sort of a lean forward. And psych is really one of those classes that once you start to get to know people on the inside, like get to know their neurology and why this is impacting them, the people who have that interest within them is just absolutely, they can't do anything except be in psychology. Then they have to get their questions answered. But we also have non-people oriented tracks, which is not something that people think about that often, but a large percentage of psychology research is based in animals. So you work with animals, not only using animal neurology, but understanding animal behavior, which is called comparative psychology, when you're using animals to understand human behavior. So we have researchers on campus who are working with animals consistently, and we even have one in our department who is working with animals and trying to understand how they move through mazes and to understand how their environment is impacting their decisions. So sometimes in Gen Psych, it's not necessarily a human component of psychology that sparks interest in a student, but it's an animal track understanding of it. And we can have all of those different types of students, and they can be happily at home in our psych major.
For this question, I want you to think back to your time as an undergrad at EKU. Was there a particular story about a professor, narrative maybe, that you have, somebody that influenced you deeply? If so, how? And what are some of those characteristics that maybe you try to model for your students?
I think that I had a couple of different professors who were just absolutely amazing, and I still keep in touch with. And one of them was my academic advisor, Dr. Teresa Botts. And I remember a wonderful conversation that I had with her. She knew me as a person who was trying to be a police detective. Again, this is why, I mean, she was my advisor in a psych major, but that I didn't want to go into psychology. And I remember one day when I was starting to realize I needed to change my career focus, which is huge in a person's life, realizing that they have to just change or else they won't be who they are. So I came to talk to her about it, and I said, but I really, really like psychology. So I kind of maybe want to do something with that. And she said, oh, okay, do you want to, she said, most people who go into psychology go into the clinical route, which is absolutely true, most do. And she said, so are you interested in abnormal psychology and interested in being a therapist? And I remember I looked at her and just go, no. And she laughed so hard, and she was like, okay, I don't normally get that reaction. And she said, well, the other side would be doing research and statistics. Do you want to do that? And I was like, yeah, I want to do that. I'll do that. And so she was so helpful in that she gave me every different opportunity. And then she moved with that. She wasn't trying to make me who she was. She wasn't trying to make me the version that she thought I wanted to be, but she was asking the right questions for me to be able to guide my own path. And I think that was really important at that time for me.
Yeah, I think we have this expression, maybe you've heard this before in the academic world. We say it's better to be the guide on the side than the sage on the stage.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Absolutely.
there's a lot of truth to that. I think about the folks that had the most or had the strongest impact on my life were always folks that probably didn't know they had that impact on my life. So that's good. What are you working on now? What's a research project you've got in the queue?
I have a couple in the queue that I'm working on. One of them is a fascinating study that we have just collected data with. We have about 450 participants, and we are just about ready to write that up. And with being wary of giving too much away, right? Because researchers always hold our studies very close before they're published. It's asking about the personality and individual difference variables associated with engaging in fad dieting cycling. So this month you're really into keto. Next month you're really into Atkins diet. The next month you're trying to drink all liquids as a diet. Please, no one do that. That's not good for you. But so what is it that is driving this force, especially in teenagers and college students? What is different about the people who are cycling through these diets and really doing damage to their body? How can we stop it?
That's wonderful. That is so relatable to your audience too. Wow. I can't think of something that students would be more interested in. I know sometimes as academics, we tend to be up here where our students are more down here and trying to find that vernacular, but I could see your students getting very excited about a project like that.
Yeah, and one of the great things that they helped me with, because as I said, these are all publishable projects, whereas independent studies for students they're generally just not. They're learning techniques. But so this project is one that they are getting on. They are going to be on these academic presentations. They're going to be their authors on the paper. It's going to be published probably in something like the Journal of Health Psychology. And one of the things that they added to it was the social media component, with the fact that social media is driving probably the majority, even though we haven't analyzed it quite yet. We just finished collecting the data, but we think that social media is the driving force of a lot of this, convincing these kids to do this and engage in these behaviors. So I would not have known. I'm not on social media. So I would have had no idea that social media was the driving force for this. And even if I was on social media, I would not be getting those ads, right? Because my search history would lead me down like hobby farming things. I wouldn't be seeing all of these ads.
Yeah, social media is fascinating in and of itself because there's this kind of dopamine reaction that I think people get from it. It's almost like addictive. So in one sense, you have folks that are not on it at all, but you still feel sort of the pressure because you're not in the know, right? You're left out of some of these conversations, even if you don't want to be on it. You feel like you have to. It's an odd push-pull with it.
Yeah, they call that FOMO, right? Fear of missing out.
Right. So let's talk about you a little more. You're walking down one hall and there's a group of students and they're talking about you and they're saying some positive things about you. What are they saying?
That's a good question. I don't think I normally think in that angle, but I think some of the positive things, I hope some of the positive things that they're saying is that what I'm teaching is not only helping them understand genetics, statistics, biology, and neurology, but is also applying directly to their life and allowing them to understand themselves a little bit better, kids a little bit better. And I hope that they are treating each other better also and know how to treat other people based on how I am teaching them to understand each other. I also hope that they like my classes because of the level of the interactive nature of them, especially my upper level classes. I try to get them every week to do interactive projects or think, pair, share, or do little mini presentations. I always try to get them up and active in those upper levels. Now, I wish that I could do that with my 100 and 200 level, but as you know, sometimes we have so much that needs to go on in those, but especially those upper levels, by the time you're a psych major or a psych minor, you are doing interactive things every single day with your professors. You are not only learning high level information and learning how to apply it, but you're also getting up and active every day too.
So I think you know the obverse of that. You continue down the hall, you round a corner, there's another hall. So there's some students that are saying some not so nice things about you. What are some of those challenges that they're talking about?
They are probably talking about the fact that research methods, statistics, and genetics is hard. It is difficult. It's high level subject matter, and I do a lot of office hours, reteaching a lot of information, going back over genetics again, going over SPSS or our statistical software, teaching that on a one-on-one basis. So some of the classes that I teach, not only are they a lot of fun and you learn some interesting stuff, but they can be difficult. It is a science, especially when you look at developmental psychology is a pure science as well. We sometimes will dabble in the social environmental world, but some developmentalists are really working with genetics. So you have a big background in the physical sciences, biological sciences when you're taking my classes. And they may not think about that. They may think like, oh, 3-year-olds are really cute. That's going to be an easy class. And then they go in and they're like, what? I have to know about genetics. But we pull through. We have individual office hours, not only like Zoom meetings now sometimes, but sometimes still just individual office hours where we pull them through. Again, because we're a small department and because we're a small school, I can have one-on-one attention so that even the students who are struggling can get pulled up.
Yeah, if the content is hard, though, that's not necessarily a criticism of you, right? It's only the way you deliver the content.
So something about me specifically?
Yeah, I'm going to push you a little bit further on
Okay.
that. What is something like, think about this in terms of your own goals and that. It doesn't even necessarily have to be with teaching. It could be something else. But what do you think what challenges you? What are you working on?
I think that one of the maybe those individual things that they may not like goes back to the activity level in my classes. So we do mini presentations all the time, and I make them get up and do presentations all the time. And I make them talk in front of people and do public speaking all the time. I know all their names, so I'll ask them a question every single day. So I do put them on the spot a lot. So that's probably something about me that a lot of students would not like, that having to be put on the spot. Give us everybody's doing presentations today. Get up and talk in front of your peers and your professor.
Yeah, I'll interject here as the dean. I will support that because I was in a meeting this morning with all the area businesses. Pretty much all of them are represented. Whirlpool was there, Marathon. And it was with the president of BG, the president of UF, and the president of Owens Community College. And we're in preliminary talks about utilizing the Owens Community College facility a little more for training, both on the job and kind of continuous education training. And the refrain that I heard from all the business leaders again and again and again, this was consistent. There were some specific skills and things others were looking for, but they all said the same thing. We need people with interpersonal skills. People have to know how to present in front of an audience. They have to know how to not just talk, but to communicate via emails, make coherent emails. You wouldn't think that those type of skills, as basic as they sound, would be something that companies are looking for, but they really emphasize that again and again. So, I mean, that's just a word to the wise to the students here. You are going to have to present. No matter what job you go into, you will be talking in front of an audience.
Absolutely.
So, thank you for that. What do you love about UF? What gets you up in the morning and what gets you excited about work?
I love the campus. I have been generally at larger schools, and you don't know the people who work in those other buildings, right? You work on your side of campus in a large campus, and they work on their side of campus, and you don't know them. I know almost everyone here, and I never thought that I would make that statement about a campus, but it is truly accurate. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head how many faculty we have. Maybe you do, about.
Yeah, that's a good question. It has gone down somewhat, but I thought it was in the 260 range.
Yeah, that's such a workable group. I know. Yeah. I know from looking at people what department they're in. I know most people's names. I know the people who work at the coffee shop that I go to every day. I chatted with the wonderful woman who works at the coffee shop. I saw her at the gym yesterday. We had like a good chat. It's just, you're going to see these people everywhere. And it's so comfortable. And it's small to the point where you know everyone, but it still has all the amenities of a large campus. And the students feel very safe and comfortable here, and you see them all the time. They're always saying hi. I can't walk through campus without constant students saying hi, and I love that. And you would not see that at a larger school. So yeah, that's what I love about the campus. It's a small number of people, but still all the amenities of a larger school.
Yeah, well said. I've often felt that myself. It's good to hear other people say it. So thinking about your career to date, you're at what we would call, I think, classically on an academic line, you're at the beginning of kind of your mid-level career, right? You got associate, 2 years ago?
Last year.
Last year. Okay. So you're just at that level. And of course, there are more expectations come with that in terms of leadership on campus and maybe a different research agenda, thinking about where you want to go with your teaching next, maybe switching up your courses a bit. But thinking in kind of the trajectory of your career today, what's something you're extremely proud of, and what's maybe a goal 5-10 years out for you?
The thing that I'm most proud of are my research assistants. That I have in any given year about 4 to 8 research assistants, and they stay with me for years. So it's not just one semester, they stay with me for 2 or 3 years. And then I write them letters of recommendation to their high level careers, and then they go off into those fields. So I have research assistants who are in PhD programs. I have one that's in med school. I like to track them, and I still work with papers on them. And just seeing where they are and knowing that I helped them get there is an amazing feeling. And that's only going to grow. I'm only going to have more out there in the field. And I'm really looking forward to the day that my research assistants become my colleagues and have PhDs and MDs for themselves, and we're able to work on projects together and see each other at conferences. And I know that that's coming, and it's very close, and I'm really excited for the day that can happen. My research trajectory for the next few years is to get into longitudinal research. So I have now developed really solid relationships with different schools in Findlay and different daycares in Findlay and BG. So I am now looking into performing longitudinal studies that will hopefully track kids in their development for 5, 10, even 15 years down the line. And I think that I am now getting to the point where I am a trusted researcher enough in the community for universities and different schools to trust me enough to go on that journey with me.
Wonderful. If there was, let's say if there was a misconception by the public about the field of psychology, let's just talk in the vernacular here. What are some common misconceptions people have about the field?
The one that I run into the most is not even necessarily false, but it's not representative. And that's that if I say, you know, I have a PhD in psychology or that I'm an experimental psychologist, people will say, oh, you know, like you're trying to read my mind, or they say like, oh, I can't tell you anything. You're a therapist, you know, you're going to like trying to be diagnosing me. I get that all the time. You're going to try to diagnose me. Like, first of all, I don't do that in my field. I have nothing to do with that. I have never given therapy in my life. I never plan to. I'm in the lab. I'm a researcher. And so I think that that's one of the main misconceptions is that people think psychology, they immediately think that a person is a therapist, which is a wonderful and helpful field in the community. But people also can kind of fear therapy at the same time. You know, they think that they don't need it, or they think that it's untrusted for some reason. But so I think that we need to really build up people's openness to understanding mental health and trusting mental health practitioners and engaging with them when they need some assistance, and then lessening the stigma to mental health issues. So I think that side does need to be built up, but at the same time, I would like it if they also understood that not all people who have PhDs in psychology or are psychology professors are therapists, that experimental psychologists do exist. I'm proof of that, and we're a large percentage of the field.
Yeah, the common question I often get, I hear this at parties, people that don't know me, if they tell your profession, they'll say, well, I better watch the way I speak around you, as if I was a speech instructor, or they'll start asking me questions about literature, which I know nothing about. It's not my field at all, not even remotely. So I can appreciate the misconceptions folks have, and it's fun to have those conversations with folks that aren't academics too, I think.
I bet you do get that. Like, tell me about the Bronte sisters, and you're like, ah.
Yeah, not really what I do. I'm more contemporary rhetoric, so not even close. But yeah, tell us about some of the other things that you do within the department. I know, for example, there's an honor society, correct? Psyche. What are some of the things that group does, and are there other activities, other events that the department sponsors?
Yeah, so there's Psyche, which is the psychology club. So that's for everyone who has an interest in psychology. And what they have meetings, and they do in a non-COVID year, right? A lot of this is shifted right now, but it'll come back next year. They'll start to hopefully be able to do all those activities again, but they do a lot of social activities. And it's really just getting to know each other. They get to know professors a little bit, because we'll come and talk at their meetings, and we try to recruit them a little bit to get involved in research. And they have things like a night where they have graduate students who come in to talk to them about how to get into graduate school, and how to fill out applications, and what are the different things that you can do as a psychology major. So that's like Psychology Club does a lot of that. And then we have the Honor Society Psych-Hi. And in Psych-Hi, you know, you do have to be second semester sophomore. You have to be at the top of your class, top 35%. You have to have taken 9 hours in psychology and have a 3.0 in that field, but those are the requirements for that. So it's that elevated. So everybody's in Psychology Club. And then if you are, you know, an active, good participating student, and then as you move on toward your junior year, then you get inducted into Psych-Hi. And Psych-Hi as an honor society is something that stays with you for the rest of your life. When you go to certain conferences, you know, they'll have sections or dinners for Psych-Hi members, and you get to know people. It's a good thing to have on your resume, but it also allows people to understand that if you were in Psych-Hi, you know, this automatically tells them about your position as an honors student and that you were elevated in that way at your university. So it also helps you out a little bit when getting jobs. So I'm in charge of actually right now both of those programs too. I'm the
Wow.
ambassador for both of them. So sometimes you're going to see those overlap in the projects that they do, and sometimes they're going to be individual. So right now, Psychi and Psychology Club as a group, they are going to be doing this semester a charity walk. So they're going to be having people donate to a charity based on how many miles they walk. And then they're going to promote not only Psychi and Psyche a little bit through that, but also give back to the community.
So go back again to your own days as an undergrad, and I want you to think about that and then kind of flash forward to your point now. What are some bits of advice you'd give, not necessarily even about the major specifically, but just about being an undergraduate college student? What would you tell your students coming in?
Get involved as fast as you can. That is my absolute statement. And I know that not everyone can live on campus, but if you can, you absolutely should. Having a roommate and living on campus is just a rite of passage. It is just something that, yeah, it's going to be a little annoying at times, but that's part of it. That's part of moving into the college experience, is having a roommate, living in a dorm, having a shared common room, going to the cafeteria to eat your meals, getting to know people there. And that's really what it is. And while we can absolutely try to build those opportunities for students who commute or live off campus, and they do have those opportunities, if at all possible, I think that living on campus is an amazing opportunity that people need to get involved with. Other things, despite where you live, I think that students need to start engaging in maybe intramural sports leagues, or they need to start going to the cafeteria to eat and engaging and asking people if they can sit with them, starting to make friends and starting to engage. Because students who create those friend groups early on and who engage in things like clubs and intramurals and sports, they are the ones who are not only going to do better academically, but they're also going to have a better time. They're going to be more psychologically healthy their whole time here, and they'll be able to look back at college with a wonderful view, as most of us do. Unfortunately, I think it's those people who maybe didn't take opportunities that when they arose, or they didn't really get to know people. I think that sometimes you can find yourself a little bit isolated. So I think definitely talking to people, getting out there, doing whatever you can to get that group.
That's great advice. And I think Findlay gives you an opportunity to be a big fish in a small pond. You had referenced this earlier. At larger schools, it can often be tough to get involved. And I think of specifically, I'm going to reference another department on campus, the comm department, where we have the full array of broadcast media. If you want to be a DJ, you can do that day one. You can go be behind the camera your freshman year. If you're going to do that at Ohio State, you're lucky if you can get in your senior year to get that kind of experience. So that's great advice. And, I think this was kind of implied in what you said too. This is a chance to remake yourself. So whatever you might have thought you were in high school, that doesn't matter. This is you. This is your time to do what you want and take advantage of it. It's great advice. So I think we'll probably wrap up here. Thank you very much, Allie. Thank you, Dr. Kiefner-Burmeister. If you'd like to follow up with questions for her, get ready for this. It's a mouthful. Contact her at Kiefner-Burmeister@findlay.edu. That's, help me out here, KIEFNER-BURMEISTER@findlay.edu. She'll welcome any additional questions you have for her. So thank you again for joining us, and thank you, Allie.
Thank you so much. Have a great day. Thank you.